entire spectrum. And I know locally, you know, a lot of times you're over on the lowest compliant price side of things. And we'll talk a little bit about what the implications are for that. So, you know, the other thing that we see a lot is that right now, we're still not seeing enough priority or mention of purchase specs in the control system hardware software. So it's not only just simply mentioned, but it's enough detail so that if you're in a low bid environment, you're actually getting a fair and complete and comparable bid between different suppliers. Okay, so back to our PC example. You know, if you're in your home and you buy a PC from a local shop, you know, you don't just open up the box, take it out, and you're secure. There's a number of things that you do. There's some software that needs to be configured. There's probably a bunch of patches that have to be updated. If it's a shared PC that your family is using, then you need to decide if you're going to set up user accounts and whether they've got different priorities or whatever. You may want to install, hopefully you install some sort of firewall. You know, you need to do some training. You need to tell your family a little bit about, be careful about emails. And what do they do if they see an issue? You know, don't just ignore it, report it to you. And then, so it takes effort, it takes time, and so and then it's not set and forget it because there's going to have to be patches done. So that's in your home. But you know, if you're an IT group, you've got hundreds or thousands of PCs to deal with. So you're going to try to reduce the time and effort by making sure that you know, that you've got a company security policy and that you're getting PCs ordered that comply with that specification. But in addition, you would still not just simply drop that PC on somebody's desk. You're going to set it up for them. You're going to make sure that that they understand what the company policies are, and you're going to have systems in place that make sure that that PC stays secure, not just at the time of delivery, but stays secure down the road. So then one of the questions are, you know, if you're looking at secure out of the box, is what does it even mean? Do you mean that your design and your bid specifications are secure? Do you mean it as delivered when it was commissioned? Or hopefully 6 months later, is it secure? And, you know, the 6244333 series, which I was the editor of and Sinclair and others were key contributors to, that specification, and to be SL2 or SL3 compliant, that the wording is very specific. It says, shall provide the capability to. It doesn't say that it does it. It says it provides the capability to do multi-factor authentication. It provides the capability to support network segmentation. So the implied thing there is you're buying something that has the capability of a given security level, but that does not guarantee that in fact what you have at your site is in fact compliant. And that's where it gets into all the various services that many different speakers have been talking about. And then of course, even if all the known vulnerabilities were eliminated, there's still other ways of hacking into your system. And there's a lot of secure practices involved in maintaining a secure system. Right, so in terms of, let's focus on some of the things that really have to happen at site. And a number of people have been talking about doing some risk assessments. So first of all, holistically, you'd look at your entire plant, and you'd look at, you'd come up with basically what you felt were the key targets, and assess the threats. And it's a very long thing, so I'm not in any way trying to describe what a risk assessment looks like. But you would analyze your paths, you would identify where your doors and windows are, so to speak. And you might even start thinking about what your compensating countermeasures might be. And then specifically at site, as part of doing this stuff, you would do some scans. Now, you wouldn't do them on an active system, but you would be looking for open ports and undocumented devices and rogue. So remember that drawing in our cybersecurity minute. That plan was not up to date. It was not kept up to date. And that's what you're going to find over and over again, I'm sure, in your own plants, is that you cannot just simply pull out the network drawings and assume they're in fact correct. So one of the things you want to do in terms of site activity, again, is you want to ensure that you in fact do have the network segmentation that you had designed in. And one of the things that I think is really, really key, particularly if you're in a multi-vendor environment, is that you have a reference architecture, and you negotiate that reference architecture with all your different vendors, and then they help you ensure that that reference architecture is maintained. So in other words, if one of your people suggests something that is in conflict with the reference architecture, your vendors should feel empowered to actually say, that's to be in conflict with our agreed upon reference architecture. I think we need to rethink that. I don't think we should make that connection. I don't think we should connect the business network directly to level 1. That's in conflict with the reference architecture. And just like the guys with the TV screen, they need to feel like they're part of the team, and then they are empowered to point out things that they think is reducing the security of your systems. And then so of course it's important to maintain that segmentation. Oh, and then one final thing. I mean, you should be, and I'm using a bunch of Emerson pictorials, but this is not a sales presentation, and I'm not trying to, it's just, that's what I've got on my deck, of course. But, you should be expecting your vendor to have, detailed security manuals that you can reference in terms of best practices and recommended practices that your particular vendor feels are relevant to their system. In other words, they know how their system was designed and how they felt was going to be the best way of protecting it long term. Okay, so, a number of people have mentioned firewall rules, and they're one of the things that seem to get screwed up over time. So one of the things you want to do is you want to make sure that you get the firewall rules set up, and then it's extremely important to make sure that that those firewall rules are detailed enough so they're only allowing the access that's really needed by specific people to specific nodes, and specify what they can access, and absolutely have change management control around those firewall rules. So I'm saying a lot of things that are really obvious, but I'm pointing out things that have to be done at site, and that you can't really expect to just buy something, pull out of the box. So smart switch configuration, you need to lock all the ports that are not being used, and you need to again and again establish procedures. Change work processes, which I know are really tough. Changing work processes in an industrial environment is really, really tough. And in fact, that's one of the major differences between an industrial environment and, say, a banking environment. So I'm not saying that you can just segment, but you need to be thinking about doing more segmentation. So, I've got a picture of our controller firewall, but, the Tofino, that's fine too. The point is, there's other things that you can do to segment down, and what you're trying to do here in the classic cybersecurity sense is you're trying to minimize the scope of a breach. So if somebody gets in, so you assume that there's a possibility that somebody can get past all your defenses, then you want to limit the scope of their breach, of the penetration, and the duration of time that they're in there, and so all the various things. So you limit the damage, and segmentation is a key part of that. So another thing is, and other people have mentioned it, is workstation hardening. So our only authorized applications installed is the OS automatically configured, unused, disabled, or part. And you're going to see situations where sometimes the hardening template, that's an automatic part of the installation. Is it done automatically, or is that something that you actually have to pay extra for, or whatever? Another part of workstation hardening, and this is something that actually has to be done mostly at site, is your user configuration. So in other words, you start maybe with the vendor's default policies for user configuration, but then it's perfectly reasonable for you to have your own site-specific policies, right? In terms of, do passwords expire? Don't they expire? I mean, in some cases, it's just simply operationally acceptable to have shared accounts in a control room environment if you have other ways of compensating for that, maybe physical card readers to get into the room. So I mean, there's decisions that they made to balance between the level of security that you want and getting the work done. I mean, so there's been quite a bit of discussions in the last talk about USB USB hardening or USB control. And obviously you have to have a policy. But a policy without some sort of way of controlling it is, it's difficult. You're depending on humans to always notice things. And so, like, for example, we have a way within Delta V12 and on to basically completely lock all the ports down, and then you can open them up temporarily. But the point being is if you can automate security to some extent and not depend on manual processes, that's all to the good. But you can't just depend on automatic. The people really are the key. When people talk about people, process, and technology, that is absolutely the right order for an effective cybersecurity program. Okay, so then we talk about patches and antivirus definitions. So you need to make sure that the definition files are getting updated. You have to have a policy around that. In other words, how often are they going to do it? Are you going to have a way of doing it automatically, or are you going to do it manually? And if you do it manually, then it's somebody's specific job to get that done, and somebody else makes sure that they get it done right. You got oversight going on. So the Symantec guy should be happy I used a Symantec thing. Sorry, McAfee. But the point is that there's managed modes for being able to get that done, and there's configurations that need to be get done, and this is ongoing. This is not something that's out of the box and you're done. You need to get it done. And then, of course, our favorite subject of all time in control system security is patching. And the panel yesterday was discussing about the pain around patching. And I guess I would just say as an aside, we could be on Linux and you'd still have patching. I mean, Heartbleed was on OpenSSL. That was open source. I mean, there's nothing magical about open source versus Microsoft versus whatever. Nevertheless, you have to have a patching policy. You need to get those patches done, and you need to install those patches, because remember, you might be secure at commissioning, and then 6 months later, you might be extremely insecure, and part of the reason might be because you haven't been maintaining your patching. Now, you don't have to do it yourself. You can outsource that to your vendor or some other supplier, but it really does need to get done. And you need to make a decision as to how often you're going to do it. I mean, if you get it done quarterly, that's actually probably almost best of breed in the industrial control system space. I know in the IT world you just cringe at that, but if you can get it done on a quarterly basis, I would argue you're really at almost the best of the breed. And the other issue is, how are you going to get it done? So I thought I'd just spend a little bit of time. I know I have limited time, but I thought I'd get a little bit to discuss this a little bit. So I mean, you can do it manually, where you could bring the patches in from the internet, and they've been certified already by your vendor as being acceptable. You'd bring them into a server, at level 3. You're not allowing any connections at all directly wired down to your control network. So you're going to have to come up with some other way of getting those patches down there. So one way might be the evil USB or burning whatever. But there's ways you can do that. I mean, there's very clever USB stick technology. You can also do some checking. You can do various things to make sure that that's done securely, and then you would manually move them out there. Now, I mean, if you add a little bit of infrastructure, I mean, you can set up extremely tight controls for moving information back and forth between the level 3 and level 2.5. And you'd set up, say, you'd have basically a upstream server and a downstream server patches. You'd still bring the information in, you would bring it down through, and then you'd have some sort of semi-automatic way of rolling it out. And that can be done. And again, to some extent, reducing the amount of manual effort, there's a certain implicit increase in security by not having to depend on people finding time in their busy day to do things. So finally, you can kind of do a semi-automated way. You bring it in, you carry it across, and then you let the downstream server do it. So there's all sorts of permutations. The point is, figure out a way you're going to do it. Figure out a way that you feel is secure. Confirm with your vendor. Have anybody, third party, if you want to, take a look at it. But just make sure it gets done. So accounts and passwords. Let's loop back to users again. You need to make sure that the user is configured right, You need to integrate your user policies with the control network. You need to make sure that users have the least privilege that they need in order to do their job. Don't give everybody admin rights. And then when somebody leaves the company, you need a very effective way of getting that person back out of the system again. And there's various ways of doing that. I'm not going to go into it, but you got to make sure that you keep your user lists clean. Okay, and then that might include doing two-factor authentication. I mean, that's a possibility. We don't actually see people using it that much, but I mean, that certainly is something you can add. So, done? So site monitoring. Remember that camera that was set up and then nobody seemed to notice that it was being blocked? So if you're going to put a bunch of stuff in terms of, like what Safdar was talking about with a bunch of monitoring information like that, then it's really, really important that those logs are getting collected, they're getting consolidated probably. Establish responsibility for looking at them, whether you're doing it or whether you outsource it. And you might even have a security event monitor package that helps you collate things. So there's all sorts of logs out there, because remember, I think somebody, I don't remember who it was talking about the other day, either the McAfee or Symantec guy, I believe, was talking about how long people are in these systems before they're noticed, right? It can be years before people recognize that there's somebody on their networks that they don't know about. And that's partly due to the lack of, they may have the monitoring, but then nobody's actually looking at the information. Backup recovery. That's been mentioned earlier today as well. You have to have a backup restore. I mean, that's part of your security program, is to ensure that you do have backups. Those backups are archived off-site someplace as well as on-site. You need to verify that those backups are good. How many people have done a backup and then when you needed it really bad, that's when you found out that it in fact wasn't any good? Me? Me? So you have to have policies. You have to have some sort of thing that the vendor helps develop so that you know you're actually getting everything you need. And then that ends up being a huge, broad range of different things. So whether it's a circle or it's a line, the point is there's patch management, antivirus, assessments, consulting services, all sorts of health monitoring, disaster recovery, spare parts. That all sounds really familiar, doesn't it? And it's absolutely true. If one of the books in your library is missing, then you've got a problem. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but you've got a potential real problem if something happens and you don't have plans in place, right? It's just the same as in the Gulf Coast of the U.S. If a hurricane comes in, if you don't have your plans in place, it's way too late when the winds are blowing and the rain is coming down, right? You got to be ready. Okay, so you've done all that. You've done all your security assessments and the protections, and you've got all your user things, and so wow. What's next? Well, audit, audit, audit. You really need to be 6 months later, yearly, you need to reassess, make sure that people are in fact maintaining the patching, people are actually keeping the firewalls right. I'm afraid there's just no way around it. I mean, you need to make sure that this is happening. So just some final thoughts. I know I'm between you and coffee, so, huh? Oh, okay, well, then I'm not between you and coffee. So what I would say is try to be as specific as you can in your RFQs about for security. Now, that's easy to say, but it's really, really hard to do. So I guess what I would say perhaps is also build in some engineering time so all that site work can get done. So it's sort of like operational engineering, rather than capital expense. It's almost like an op expense. And please don't just write down must be 62443 compliant. That is very unhelpful. And I'm one of the authors, I'm one of the leaders of the ISA 99 group. That's extremely unhelpful. It doesn't get you what you need. Collaboration is absolutely important. The number one failure that I've seen in having effective cybersecurity in the industrial space is where people are not collaborating with their vendor. Okay, that may sound like a sales thing, maybe it is a little bit, but I'm absolutely sincere on that. It's really, really important. And then you make sure that you establish additional secure maintenance policies and procedures. So you need to, throughout the entire life cycle, you need to procure, deploy, and maintain your cybersecurity. Security is an action verb, I think, as many of us know. It's not a state of being, it's an activity. So with that, I don't have any bribes.
No more iPads?
So, other than a kind of a wry smile.
Probably have time for one question.
Okay.
And then we can, we do have the break coming up after, of course, this next speaker,
Okay.
so we can discuss it further.
And I'm going to get rid of that right now.
Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. It was very interesting. I have a question or suggestion, rather, maybe for Emerson, Honeywell, and process control vendors in general.
Yeah.
Regarding patch management.
Right.
And your recommendations about quarterly updates.
Yeah.
Other vendors might have different recommendations.
Yeah.
Why not develop some sort of client which actually collects signatures from Emerson or Honeywell to actually approve patches which are tested by such companies? This way, if there are any processes in the company to push updates, it could be verified by these clients, which have been tested by the companies like Emerson or Honeywell.
Okay, if I understand your question, and I apologize, if I understand your question, I think that's what we already do in most cases. So if on Patch Tuesday, Microsoft sends out a bunch of patches, I think most of the major vendors within a week have validated which patches are in fact A, relevant to their systems, because not every Microsoft patch is relevant, and B, whether in fact there's anything that's going to break their system. I mean, Emerson, we should have everything by Friday of that week. At that point, if you're on our maintenance thing or on some other vendor's thing, I'm sure you get informed that those patches are ready to go and they can be downloaded and be installed whenever you're ready. The problem is, most Microsoft patches involve a reboot, and there's always a risk associated with rebooting a PC. It may not necessarily come back up, and it may not have anything to do with the patch. It may be a weakened power supply or who knows what. So there's a risk associated with doing the patches, and that's why normally people would not do them just all the time when they're available, but would wait. And then very often, since it's not something that's part of their normal job, it's sometimes very useful to have someone who does do that on a regular basis do the actual patching. So it wouldn't be necessarily your normal control room guys that are doing that. So I don't know if I've answered your question or not, but I think there was an allusion the other day, I think Sinclair talked about the other day, that there is a 62443, is it 3.2? Sinclair is the patch one? I think so. Anyway, there is an evolving standard within 62443 that talks about what are the responsibilities of the vendor, what are the responsibilities of the asset owner, the system integrator and things like that. So there's definitely work to be done there, and it's one of the biggest pain points we've got, for sure.
Thank you. Well, thank you. And big hand of applause, please, for Jeff Potter. Thank you once again. Now, Jeff will be around during, of course, the coffee break and the lunch until the end of the day. So if you do have any further questions, please feel free to go up to him. Our next speaker, speaking on the subject of a holistic policy-based approach to cybersecurity title. Now, I'll tell you a little bit about him. With a PhD in computer science, he's a professor in information sciences in Kuwait University. He's also currently the editor-in-chief of Journal of Software, amongst many accolades and achievements. It's with my absolute honor to invite Dr. Qasim Salah.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
This is yours.
Good morning. The word title shouldn't be there. I don't know how it went there. Okay, so I'll be talking about maybe non-technology oriented talk like the previous talk, more of a broad level, high level approach, holistic policy-based approach, which I am trying to convince that this is much better way of achieving security. I'm at Kuwait University in the College of Computing Sciences and Engineering. And how do we go here? It was mentioned. I have my CISSP from academia to do this. This was something I did in 2005, which I'm maintaining. Last month I did my PMP, and I'll tell you why I do those things, keep alive. And last summer I did my Certified Software Development Professional, which is a premier certification in software engineering. The reason is to really, the whole idea of achieving security is a project-based approach, is a strategic-based approach.